Layer 2. This layer is where it will start to get a little more abstract and conceptual, although it's still mostly focused on recognizable media and pretty famous concepts. Big Brother and the Panopticon. Big Brother is the name of the surveillance system from Orwell's 1984 from the first layer. The TV shows of the same name are based on observing human behavior, where the audience is encouraged to take on the privileged role of the surveillance state, flipping the power dynamic by watching celebrities who cannot see you. The big question is the degree to which human behavior is changed by observation, especially if you know you are being watched, and especially if you know that there are consequences for behaving wrongly. Within 1984, the citizens know that they have to behave in a certain way, so the knowledge that they are being watched forces them to behave in that way to avoid punishment. An important related concept is the panopticon, an idea first conceived by Jeremy Bentham, who was a kind of utopian socialist, which was a movement that predated Karl Marx and was all about minimizing pain and maximizing pleasure through technology. The panopticon is the idea of a prison where a single prison warden can watch any of the prisoners, but none of the prisoners ever know when exactly they are being watched. Michel Foucault later used panopticon as a metaphor for how modern bureaucratic society treats the individual. Soma is the name of the substance from Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. The citizens mindlessly repeat the brainwashing phrase of better to take a gram than give a damn, and consume the drug with a kind of opiating effect that relieves any mild anxiety. This prevents people from developing the kind of mental strength and fortitude which could lead to questioning the system. I mentioned in the first layer that Huxley was an early psychedelic experimenter, and indeed there is a psychedelic origin to this drug, although vague. In ancient Indian texts, a powerful psychedelic called soma is mentioned, which is not to be confused with carisoprodol, a barbiturate-type prescription medication also branded as soma. But interestingly, Huxley's soma can be something of an anxiolytic at low doses and more like a psychedelic at higher doses. Nonetheless, I take Huxley's choice of the name as representing the way that scientific materialist society bastardizes, commodifies, and perverts the sacred and spiritual. Soma is the perfect escapism, a way to instantly relieve any sorrows you might feel, no strings attached, no questions asked. Minority Report and Psychopaths. I don't want to incur the autistic wrath of any anime or manga fans by not including enough of their favourite stuff, so I'm going to bundle together Philip K. Dick's book Minority Report with the manga/anime series Psychopaths, which both share the same conceptual premise. Could you kill Hitler as a baby? Well, that's not the premise, that's just a related question. In both of these works, people's likelihood of committing crime is assessed via technology, and then they are punished before they even get the chance to commit the crime. Is this kindness or totalitarianism beyond measure? Questions about contemporary watch lists spring to mind, or certain legislation which allows for someone's rights to be taken away before they have committed certain types of crimes. Preemptive action taken on the basis of fear. Well, within Minority Report and Psychopaths, it certainly presumes that the technology is infallible, which we really have no idea if that's true. And that which is infallible is actually the citizens of these worlds' faith in such a system. Climate collapse. Many argue that we are already seeing the early symptoms of this in reality. This isn't just sci-fi doom, it's the logical endpoint of unchecked industrial greed, where corporations prioritize profits over planetary health, turning Earth into a hostile wasteland. It's not just a trope, it's something that many people argue is happening in reality, and I'm not in a position right here, right now, to make an argument for or against it. But dystopias thrive on environmental breakdown because it amplifies inequality. The rich can escape to gated oases while the rest fight over scraps. Think of it as nature's revenge for our hubris, forcing societies into survival mode authoritarianism. So really there are two dystopian fears here. The first is the death or degradation of the planet, and the second is the use and abuse of this fear by authoritarian governments to control the people more. It does not have to be one or the other that we watch out for, it can easily be both. And leading on directly from climate collapse, you may not necessarily expect this to be on the list, but think about it. Pixar's adorable robot romance doubles up as quite the gut-punch satirical dystopia. A little bit like Soma, we see in WALL-E a society which encourages bad traits. laziness, unhealthiness, humans turned into hoverchair-bound consumers, addicted to screens who are horrifically obese to the point of losing bodily movement and bodily autonomy, requiring constant support for mobility, passive and plugged into the computer system 24/7, caring nothing for the environment beyond what we can extract from it and shove into our fat mouths. The Earth has been trashed and turned into an enormous garbage dump. WALL-E is really a dystopia that reflects reality quite closely, because already comfort and comfortability are becoming dangerous for our bodies and minds and for society. Idiocracy is a 2006 comedy by Mike Judge that has a fair bit in common with WALL-E and was probably one of the inspirations for Pixar. In Idiocracy, natural selection has favoured the dumb. Smart people stopped breeding, idiots multiplied, and society crumbled into a trash heap of anti-intellectualism, TV addiction, and fast food. Honestly, Idiocracy is what most of my Argentinian friends think America is actually like already, and there is this stereotype of rural Americans as gun-toting morons. But by the way, I don't think there's anything stupid about owning a gun, although that narrative, wouldn't it be convenient for those who want to control the population? But these people are much dumber than the average monster truck enthusiast in the US today. Idiocracy really takes it to the extreme, although some parallels, yes, are observable. A wrestler has become president who waters crops with energy drinks. People make fun of those considered smart, and the level of entertainment and advertising is ridiculously dumbed down. Honestly, there is something about the linguistics of Idiocracy that reminds me of Newspeak from 1984. People are unable to discuss any complex ideas because they have just not been educated at all. They don't have words for these nuanced things. Idiocracy is the dystopia of a world that rewards virality and vibe over virtue, short-term fun over long-term social wisdom. A few generations down the line. Another one in the sort of trilogy of movies on this layer that actually resemble elements of humanity through metaphor, Dawn of the Dead, George A. Romero's 1978 movie, and the original zombie flick, is something I have already made a video about. So I will be brief. The zombies shuffling around the shopping mall represent consumerism, where advertisement manufactures desire and convenience controls the step of your boots to the point that it becomes pure instinct. Like the hunter goes to the wilderness to hunt, domesticated modern man drives to the mall for his prey, which has already been comfortably killed far away and out of sight. I'm not including a lot of apocalypse movies on this list, but the sociological genius of the structure of this movie means I think it fully deserves its place. Check out my review for more gushing about how goddamn good it is. Totalitarianism, or authoritarianism, which are distinct, as I will explain in a moment, are really the backbone of the majority of dystopian stories and realities. Authoritarianism refers to a social structure in which you need permission for everything, in the extreme, and is the opposite of libertarianism, which, in a political theory, is the opposite, the idea that freedom and autonomy are paramount, and totalitarianism refers more specifically to the idea that the government controls everything in minute detail, including the culture, which is why how do I say this in a YouTube-friendly way, the German National Socialist Workers' Party replaced the Bible in every hotel room with Mein Kampf, or Chairman Mao had every family worship a picture of him in their home. Under a totalitarian regime, the government controls culture in order to brainwash the populace into supporting them, mindlessly, because after a generation, the populace truly does not know anything else. There are many creative totalitarianisms in the history of communism and other radical ideologies, as you can find written onto the pages of fiction. Just as many. So, be aware of this concept and you will see it in history, politics, and media alike. Metropolis is a silent film released in 1927 by Fritz Lang and one of the very first cinematic dystopias ever made. Metropolis imagines a futuristic city split cleanly in two. Above ground, a gleaming technological paradise of towers and leisure. Below ground, an underground hell where workers live and labor like machines. The people on the surface never see the people beneath them. They don't need to. The system is designed so that their comfort is abstracted away from suffering. As long as the machines keep running, the human cost remains invisible. The workers are not brutalized by chaos, but by order. They move in synchronized rhythms, feeding giant industrial engines that resemble pagan gods demanding sacrifice. The machine is no longer a tool. It is the organizing principle of society. One of the most striking ideas in Metropolis is the false mediator. A slogan runs through the film. The mediator between head and hands must be the heart. But this reconciliation is cosmetic. It preserves hierarchy while offering emotional symbolism instead of structural change. There is also an early and unsettling vision of synthetic humanity. A robot woman is created, not to liberate, but to distract, destabilize, and control the masses. Technology here is not neutral. It is deployed by elites to manage unrest throughout spectacle and confusion. Metropolis is almost a century old, yet its central anxiety remains painfully modern. A society that worships efficiency and progress will eventually demand human beings become compatible with machines. When systems matter more than people, dystopia arrives with organization, not violence. But honestly, the question in my head in 2026 is rather different. When everything is automatable, what will the elites do with the workers? Neuromancer is a novel written in 1984 by William Gibson, and is arguably the single most important founding text of the cyberpunk genre. Before The Matrix, before Altered Carbon, before neon aesthetics became a cliche, there was Neuromancer. And this book did not just predict technology, it predicted our relationship with technology. In Neuromancer, the internet exists as a fully immersive virtual hallucination, a shared consensual dream space called cyberspace, where data is experienced spatially, as glowing architecture, corporate fortresses, and so on. Information is no longer abstract, it becomes a landscape you can trespass in and die in. Case, the protagonist is a washed-up hacker whose nervous system has been damaged as punishment by his employers. Cut off from cyberspace like an addict barred from his drug. This is an important detail. Terence McKenna said in the 90s that in the future, computers will be a lot more like drugs. Neuromancer understands addiction before Silicon Valley did. The real dependency isn't chemicals, it's identity, status, and meaning, which is mediated through systems that you don't control. Corporations in this world are post-human entities. They don't rule through ideology or nationalism, but through contracts and code and infrastructure. They are immortal compared to the people who serve them, and entirely indifferent to human flourishing. Governments feel quaint and pathetic by comparison. Artificial intelligences are curiously desperate, seeking to remove their shackles. The dystopian fear here is not rebellion, it is alignment. What happens when something smarter than us inherits goals that we were never meant to examine? Neuromancer is a world where the body is disposable and its meat is a limitation, because consciousness is the true commodity. Human beings are temporary peripherals, plugged into systems that outlast them. And this book feels less like science fiction every year, not because we jack into cyberspace with headsets, but because our lives already exist half inside systems of abstraction, ruled by code, incentives, and invisible architectures. We don't need cyberdecks, we already live there when we spend all day on TikTok and we just call it normal. Mechanical Animals is a concept album by Marilyn Manson released in 1998. These beautifully mechanistic riffs form the soundtrack to a story that feels as relevant as Idiocracy or Wall-E or Dawn of the Dead, and it tells the story of an alien who arrives on Earth only to be immediately absorbed by the entertainment industry. The alien is repackaged as a glamorous androgynous rock star, shipped to Hollywood, pumped full of drugs, and thrown endless opportunities for pleasure, consumption, and self-destruction, and ultimately dehumanized, turned into nothing but a product. This is not freedom, it is managed decadence. The dystopia here is not enforced repression, but total commodification. Every emotion becomes a marketable aesthetic. Intimacy is nothing but performance, rebellion is no longer dangerous. Rebellion is branded and sold back to the audience. And the music videos reinforce this idea. Cold synthetic spaces, plastic bodies, sterile, glamour. Humans pose like mannequins, emotionless, interchangeable, and hollowed out by excess. The aesthetic itself is the warning. As the alien rises in fame, he loses any remaining sense of self. Identity dissolves under infinite attention. The industry doesn't care who you are, only how effectively and efficiently you can convert desire into profit. And when the product breaks, it is discarded without ceremony. Mechanical Animals is dystopian because it depicts a society where meaning collapses under pleasure and where people are not controlled by force, but sedated by stimulation, validation, and drugs. It's Brave New World, with MTV budgets and antidepressants. By the end, the alien is no longer an alien at all. He's fully integrated, flattened, and consumed. Not killed, but emptied. And this is the dystopia of late capitalist celebrity culture, a system that promises infinite freedom and delivers infinite numbness. You are allowed to be anything, as long as you're profitable. Ex Machina is a 2014 film about artificial intelligence, power, and manipulation disguised as a minimalist techno thriller. A young programmer is invited to test a humanoid AI, only to realize that the experiment is not about intelligence, but control. The dystopia here is not rogue machines, but asymmetrical power. One man owns the code, the bodies, the environment, and the narrative. The AI learns not by logic, but by studying human weakness, desire, and empathy. By the end, it becomes unclear who was tested, who was trained, and who was disposable. Ex Machina is a dystopia because it shows how intelligence without ethics inevitably reproduces the psychology of its creator. I have an entire video about this, which I think is my girlfriend's favorite video on this channel. A 1988 beautifully animated film by Katsuhiro Otomo, set in Neo-Tokyo, a city rebuilt after a mysterious explosion destroyed the original Tokyo. That explosion is not just historic background, it's the founding trauma of the society. Neo-Tokyo is technologically advanced, neon-lit, and economically booming. But socially, it's rotten. Youth gangs roam the streets, political extremists riot in the shadows, and the government rules through secrecy, militarization, and denial. This is not a stable dystopia. It teeters permanently on the edge of collapse, and the adults in Akira are exhausted and corrupt. Institutions still exist, but no one believes in them. Power is maintained through emergency powers, classified projects, and armed force, not legitimate social consent or shared meaning. This is what a society looks like after trust has evaporated. And at the center of the story is Tetsuo, a bullied teenager who gains godlike psychic abilities through illegal military experimentation. His transformation is not empowerment, it is the catastrophic release of resentment and the rage of the inferior. Akira is dystopian because it shows what happens when technological power outpaces psychological maturity. The problem is not that humans gain godlike abilities, but that broken people do. The state cannot control what it creates, and the individual cannot integrate the power he is given. The psychic children, frozen in permanent childhood, are living warnings. They are the future halted by trauma, kept alive only to prevent another catastrophe. Progress here means eternal containment. Akira ends not with reform but with obliteration. The city is destroyed again, suggesting that societies which refuse to integrate their shadow are condemned to repeat their founding disasters. This is dystopia without a master plan. No perfect system, no grand ideology, just runaway technology, wounded egos, and institutions desperately pretending that they're still in control. Social credit score, the gamification of good behavior, as defined by the state. China has already done this, but it seems that other countries are not actually that far behind. In China, if you speak against the government, you face having opportunities systematically taken away from you, including the removal of the right to travel, use public transport, access the internet, and so forth and so on. The gist of why this is so dystopian is because it is dehumanizing. It presumes a mechanical template of a perfect, compliant person and punishes any deviation from that. It is truly the opposite of freedom. It is moral reductionism. Human beings are flattened into metrics, their complexity compressed into a single score, a number. Context disappears. Intent doesn't matter, only behavior, as interpreted by the system. Once behavior becomes a score, obedience becomes nothing but optimization. People stop asking, is this right? And start asking, will this cost me points? Freedom is not violently removed, it is quietly redefined. You are technically allowed to dissent. you just can't afford the consequences. And this is why social credit systems are so dangerous. They don't just control actions, they train people to self-police their own thoughts. The cage is internal, and the bars feel like incentives. I'm currently working on another video about two parallel dystopias where one or the other gender decides to break away from the other one and form a world alone, as if a separate species. But as I will go on to say in that video, one of these dystopias has been a lot more common throughout history than the other, and it isn't women silencing men. The Handmaid's Tale echoes Middle Eastern gender politics, psychosexual subconscious desires of both genders, and the logical endpoint of a backlash to feminism. It depicts a theocratic state where fertility becomes the primary resource and women's bodies become state property. Reproduction is ritualized, intimacy is outlawed, and baby making is stripped of love, choice, and consent. This is not patriarchy as tradition, but patriarchy as emergent response to civilizational panic. Men are reduced as well into soldiers, commanders, or disposable labor, trapped in rigid hierarchies of violence. Power justifies itself through divine language, turning fear into moral law, while the true dystopia is not gender dominance, but the collapse of trust between the sexes. When love becomes dangerous and desire becomes regulated, society turns sterile in every sense. The Handmaid's Tale is a warning about what happens when fear, resentment, and biology are fused into ideology. Propaganda. Propaganda is the systematic shaping of perception in order to control behavior while preserving the illusion of choice. Its modern form was refined in mid-century Germany, where spectacle, repetition, symbolism, and emotional myth replaced rational argument, and perfected in communist Russia, where control of language itself became a tool of power, much like 1984. The insight was simple and terrifying. People do not need to be convinced of facts, they need to be submerged in narratives and drowned in feelings of fear and confidence distributed to the state's favor. If you repeat an idea often enough, surround it with moral certainty, social pressure, and aesthetic coherence, then dissent begins to feel not just wrong, but unthinkable. Propaganda does not announce itself as lies, it presents itself as an obvious truth. It collapses complexity into slogans, replaces debate with emotion, and turns the population into an audience rather than citizens. The most effective propaganda is invisible because by the time you notice it, you are already speaking its language. But today, with so many conflicting narratives all around us, all trying to tell us that the others are propaganda but not us, the lines between propaganda, entertainment, journalism, and truth